Hey, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us at Merkle Science Meets. We do this quite often, and we actually have a really good audience that joins us for these Merkle Meets. We probably do one or two a quarter. So thank you very much for joining this one. Today we have Mr. Jeff Hood. He is the well, I'll just tell you what. I'll let him do the intro because I don't want to get that wrong. So, yeah, Jeff is a compliance officer, and I'll let him take his intro. So this should be really good. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. Yeah, Jeff Hood. I'm VP of Compliance at IOHK. I've worked in the compliance space for about 15 years and really enjoy the complexities of cryptocurrency compliance and been in that industry more so over the last 10 years. And I look forward to a discussion today. Did you want me to talk about some of my background or?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that in just a second. So today, just to let everyone know, we're going to be talking about crypto compliance, which is a hot topic. I've been in crypto for about, I don't know, 11, 12 years now. And we've seen this coming from like in the early days, and we built up to now, where we have this huge infrastructure that we're building with crypto, and crypto compliance is the one spot that we keep running into that people are like, how do I build an appropriate crypto program to mitigate risk here? So we have Jeff on. Jeff's been doing this, and we really are eager to hear what Jeff has to say. So, Jeff, with that, would you tell us about where you work and how you got there? How did you end up from traditional world to crypto world? How'd that go?
Yeah, I entered the compliance space back at Amazon, and prior to joining the role in compliance, I was responsible for business analysts and data engineers and developing solutions for the business. And so, my first step into the compliance space was really around anti-money laundering, rule tuning, and trying to make sure that for new payments services that we had the right rules in place to meet the regulatory requirements and that we tuned the rules so we didn't, generate a bunch of alerts that were not needed to be reviewed. And so that was kind of my first introduction into compliance space. And I think over the last, 5 companies I worked at, I've had some where I've been in compliance roles where it was fixing at least two of them, it was fixing a massive investigator problem where we had the wrong tools alerting way too much alerts, and we really needed to tune them. We didn't have the right people managing the configuration of those tools, and we really needed to correct things. And then the other three places were really more greenfield, where I was starting from scratch. And that I like both models, but I think the greenfield model is easier because you get to define your policy, your procedures, what you alert on, your investigator, support model, and that's a little bit easier space to work in. But I think the learnings I've had is really around the fact that one of the big learnings is reach out to your compliance community, talk about what other people are doing. When I was at one place, we would attend a brokerage meeting with a bunch of compliance professionals of different brokerages, and we asked different questions. Like when the Chinese military companies got sanctioned, and you weren't able to allow someone to sell their stock at a certain point in time, customers had a time to ACAT out those securities to another platform that was outside the US. And so you had to make those controls and comply to that regulation, and talking to other compliance people around how they're approaching to solve these problems is super important to do.
Yeah, communication seems to be the key, talking back and forth between different compliance, businesses, that are in the same business. Jeff, you work for IOHK now. So I have a twofold question for you. So one, what is IOHK? Most people probably don't know unless they're in a crypto space or have actually heard before. And then well, your last comments about being in crypto and how you kind of got there from Amazon, not crypto but to compliance. Did you accidentally get in crypto? Was it one of those things where you just kind of evolved into it, or how did that happen?
Yeah. So first start with IOHK is a research and engineering company for the cryptocurrency blockchain. Main focus has been on Cardano, but there's many people out there developing solutions on Cardano. I think if you go to IOHK.io, look at the products page, you'll kind of see a list of all of our products and what they do there. So I'm the compliance VP of compliance for IOHK, and my three areas of focus are around corporate policies. I call it financial crimes compliance, but the typical AML sanctions compliance, and then the privacy compliance. So those are the three main areas. I think for what was your second question?
So how did you go from compliance there to compliance in crypto? Was that like an
Oh,
accidental track, or did something you wanted to do, or how did you
yeah.
kind of make
At
that
a
track?
brokerage company I worked for, we launched crypto compliance or crypto trading platform. And there's where I got introduced to the compliance requirements around cryptocurrencies. And it started with tracking all of the different wallet addresses that like OFAC published that were sanctioned,
Mm.
and making sure we had the proper controls in place to prevent people from trading with those wallet addresses. But that was a very, kind of beginnings of when I think OFAC started to sanction people at the crypto wallet address level.
So what was that? Maybe 2018, 2017?
Yeah, I think so, around
Yeah,
that time.
around there. Yeah, that sounds right. So the reason why I asked that is because I actually know people in crypto compliance, and they weren't traditionally compliance in crypto. They just kind of fell over there. If you know what I mean. They just kind of ended up one day like, hey, we got this great crypto product where you want to check it out. So, and it's kind of like an accidental track. But I think you and I both agree that this is going to be a no more intentional track as this market grows. So, crypto compliance. Um, if I could, tell me about, if you have a product in crypto, and we'll leave it generic. If you have a product in crypto, how do you risk assess that product? Um, you know, Jurisdiction, customers, the product itself. Different cryptos have different, operational methods. So, how do you do that?
Yeah, so basically what I do is I look at what is the specific product that we're launching or that we have. What's the customer type that we have? Do we have individuals or entities? And what are the jurisdictions that we want to launch the product in? And which jurisdictions should we restrict people from accessing the product from? And basically, so do basically a risk-based assessment of the product based off the product, the customers, and the jurisdictions against the regulatory requirements. At times, I may leverage outside counsel in regions that
Mhm.
are experienced in that area to give us their legal memos of what we should and should not do, whether we do or do not fall under like a virtual asset service provider registration requirement or not, which jurisdictions we should uh, restrict. Like, China's, it's illegal. We definitely want to make sure all the comprehensive sanction countries are restricted. We definitely
Mhm.
want to look at the FATF high risk countries list and other high risk countries that have higher propensity for terrorist financing, and decide what's our risk tolerance for allowing or removing those jurisdictions. And then basically from that, that should help inform your anti-money laundering policy and sanctions policy that you would write. And I like to reference the regulations that are applicable to that product or service that you're offering in the policies. And the policy should include, the main five pillars of an AML policy or of a sanctions policy with who the AML officer is, roles and responsibilities, risk assessments, internal controls, training. Training should be defined by the type of person trained. You'll train the
Mm.
board differently on AML than you would train individuals in the company versus investigators on your team. So there's different training that will be applied. So the main summary is the risk-based analysis should inform your policies. The policies, when you publish those and get those approved by leadership, they will then inform the procedures you need to write for KYC, KYB, know your customer, know your business, sanctions, AML investigations. And the process should be defined before you figure out your tools, but you definitely want to look at the tools that can facilitate the process to reduce the number of humans you need. Any tools you deploy, you should have clear configuration documents that describe how the tool is configured to support the process. One of your biggest friends in compliance is your business analyst or data engineer. that will help you pull the transaction data into a data store that you can then run AML rules against. So it's very important to early on make sure you have the right data engineer helping you pull that information together. And then as you have all that together, then you could hire the individuals, identify the skill sets you need to implement the process, and develop your training to ramp up the resources for that.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. You just said a whole lot right there. In fact, they probably have entire day-long conferences over just what you just talked about. So your risk assessment really influences your program and your training and the specificness, of that program is the risk. Well, can you tell me just high level, if you're looking at risk in a certain jurisdiction, what is like the number one thing you'd be like, hey, we're not doing business there?
Yeah, I think it's if there's a virtual asset service provider registration requirement and your product fits in that model and you're marketing to um, um, customers in that country directly, then you're in scope for needing to be regulated. And what could happen is the regulator in that country could either send you a cease desist order to stop offering the service in that country, or B, you may have a service where consumers are using it, and if your service results in them having complaints and they file complaints to the local regulator,
Hmm.
you may have scrutiny that comes from that way in the form of penalties and fines. And so you don't really want to be in that position. And there may be a lot of jurisdictions where you don't market to individuals in that country, but by them wanting the service, they use the service. So you're not really in that scope of the kind of that regulated gray area. But it's very difficult for cryptocurrency businesses because if you look at all the regulation around the world where you need, with MiCA, UK, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, I don't know, Singapore, US, and there's just so much. The regulatory requirements are really tough for a small startup to get going. So you really want to figure out how you ramp up your products and services that may be applicable to the registration requirements, and then try to make sure you're achieving that as you grow as a business. So it's very difficult for a compliance officer to navigate that with the constant regulatory changes that we're seeing as well.
Right. So there's regulation that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and the regulator's different, obviously. And so you kind of have to go back, and this leads into my next question. How often do you review that? How often do you set training standards?
Yeah, I think you review the regulation all the time. You're always looking for something new. And you also need to be aware of the privacy regulation as well. Like if you're offering services in GDPR countries, you need to make sure you have a interoperability agreement in place between the people that you serve there and outside of there with any vendors that you use. So privacy is definitely a factor in how data is accessed for your investigation resources, whether they're in a lower cost jurisdiction and you're ramping them up. You want to make sure you have those agreements in place and your contracts are protecting the PII of your customer base that you're serving.
Mm, yes. Um, so can you just, well, there's a lot of difference between traditional compliance and crypto. I mean, they are similar in some ways. I mean, we're still dealing with financial instruments in most cases. But what's the big difference that you see? You've done them both. Which one is more difficult, less difficult, or what's the contrast here?
Yeah, I think first, what's the same is your KYC, KYB processes are very similar. You need to do verification of the individual or the entity. You need to do verification of their location, and you use attributes of data that are provided to make sure that if you have any related accounts, that you can identify those. I think the same thing is also around regulation. The regulation is out there, and it may be lacking in some areas and available in others. And so I think you're always going back to what's the regulatory requirements, and then that informs your compliance program and what you need. The one aspect I think is super important is you got to look at consumer protection. Consumer protection is different between the two traditional and cryptocurrency solutions. Traditional, you have all of the know your customer. You may understand the source of funds and have more details, intelligence about the customer. Where in crypto, you may not have all that, inside information about the customer. So consumer protection is super important to, and I think that part needs to be evolved more, where when you see large transactions or movement of funds, we need to be providing the cryptocurrency trader the ability to say, hey, this wallet address you're about to send to is a known scam address. And a pop-up comes up and the consumer is informed that, hey, watch out for this. The other main big difference is transactions are really complex in cryptocurrencies.
Mm,
You need to go through the training. You need to make sure that the forensics company that you use to screen your wallet address transactions from either receiving or sending have the right attributes of information. So you know if it's a sanctioned wallet address, sanctions jurisdiction, or has other high or severe risk that you want to mitigate. And you can appropriately block a sending transaction or, where needed, freeze a transaction coming in if it's associated with a sanctions entity. But not all cryptocurrency exchanges have that capability because we have non-custodial wallets with many that don't have the assets being managed by the entity that's providing the exchange. So there's a lot of complexity in there that you have to manage. And even like the FinCEN, for example, rules they have on red flags are different between traditional banking and cryptocurrency, where you really need to be looking at the different red flags that FATF or that your regulator publishes to find out, okay, these are the red flags I should be monitoring for. And the AML transaction monitoring is going to be very specific to figuring out how we create the monitoring that aligns with that red flag rule. And then your SAR filing and your SAR filing codes that you use will be different, because you're going to basically be saying, well, this, cryptocurrency transaction was associated with this specific SAR code that you want to reference as part of your FinCEN filing. So that way, the right people within the government agencies can go look at it and go see, oh, was this person part of this thing that we're trying to, stop, that's high risk behavior. So there's a lot of, I think the transactions are the biggest difference, and the amount of training needed of your investigator resources is much higher when you go into the cryptocurrency space.
yeah, the training definitely has to be there, right? I mean, you we talk about traditional compliance versus crypto compliance, and then we look at the extra training that's needed, at least at the crypto levels, to understand how transactions occur and custodial versus non-custodial, decentralized versus centralized. Um, so, we're really working on that training to get it right. And I do a lot of training for law enforcement and other people, and we're really trying to strike that balance between keeping it high level and very technical. We don't want to make it so technical you can't understand it, but we don't want to skip something either. So especially when it comes down to different blockchains, different block times, different attributes, and people need to understand this before they work for you. Um, so do you? I'm sure you have like a sanctions policy, or let me make this more high level. Tell me about a good sanctions policy and a good policy for AML and crypto. What does that look like? What are some things that you must have versus things that you might not have in a traditional compliance area?
Yeah, so I think for anti-money laundering policy, you need to, designate your AML officer. You need to have the roles and responsibilities. You need to have your controls identified. You need to talk about your employee training and how often you do it, the independent testing and auditing. I like to always include what's the internal testing, cycle times, and then external. And so all that should be spelled out in your AML policy with your due diligence program, your know your customer information. I really like the OFAC sanctions compliance program components they publish in the sanctions compliance program document or
Mm,
recommendation that specifies 5 areas: the management commitment, risk assessment, what internal controls you have, the testing, auditing, and training. So I typically have an AML policy that states the kind of the AML and sanctions aspects of what is required and the controls we'll have in place. And then I'll do a sanctions policy document that specifies sanctions in more detail, and then a sanctions control framework document that speaks to the framework of my sanctions compliance program to comply with the sanctions policy. And I really like the fact that OFAC published that, because it gave us a really clear detail of what's required. The other thing that OFAC published, which I really like, is in October of 2022, the I think it's called the cryptocurrency or virtual currency recommendations guide. It's a PowerPoint, and they give you
Yeah.
specific things that you should do. They recommend you do, and I use that and reference that in my policy writing. That the reason why we're doing this is because this is a recommendation from OFAC that we're following, and this is part of our compliance program. So I think looking for the regulators' publications of things that they have out there is super important at defining your policy document.
Right, a little bit of an insight into their mindset at the regulator when they publish those things. Very very good to have on board. That's good information. Um, so let's switch gears a little bit. Obviously, in crypto, if you're in the crypto compliance space, you also know what transaction monitoring looks like, and how that works. So, what are some of the best practices for transaction monitoring? Um, we know that you can't essentially stop a transaction from coming in. You have to monitor, and then you have to look. But how's that look to you? What do you look for? And on top of that, the second part of that question is, what happens if you receive a transaction and you're like, no, we don't want that. Send it away. Do something with it. What can a compliance department do to protect themselves from that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you need to know what your capabilities are. Do you take custody of those assets or do you not? And that will differ in what you're able to do. But the basic thing, you use a blockchain forensics tool that has an API feed where transactions coming into wallets that you may manage or you may host or that are non-custodial or custodial, you're looking for if there's any high or severe risk that's direct or indirect coming into that wallet. And then anything going out, is there anything that's high or severe risk associated with those wallets? So where you have custody of those assets, if it comes from a sanctions wallet, you would freeze those assets, you would report to OFAC within 10 business days, and you would let the customer know why you froze their assets and and I always like to provide them a notice with a link to the OFAC site so they can know that they can request a license to have their assets unfrozen. On the other direction, when they're sending money out of a crypto wallet to another wallet, you could reject a transaction if it's associated with higher severe risk, and you need to look at what areas you would reject. So it may be if it's to a sanctioned wallet, of course, it would be a rejected transaction, and you may report that, or you would report that. But if it's say to a scam site, you have to ask the question: is this person a scammer, or is this person a customer that is a victim of the scam? And so that's where you've got to look at it and see if there's patterns of information that would help you determine that. And so I think you have to develop your rule sets based off of the direct transaction of high and severe risk behaviors and what actions you would take, and then the indirect. Now, the indirect exposure is what there really isn't much regulatory guidance on and how you should handle those. It may go 2, 3, 4, 5 hops down the road. I think around the 2 to 3 hops is where you might take action or do something, but it all depends. You have to look at, the type of crypto technology. If it's a Bitcoin and it's a peel chain and you want to identify if the person owns these other wallets down the hop chain, then that may be a different action you take than one where they go through an exchange and it goes then somewhere else. So those are kind of some of the main things. The one thing that I learned around seizures and subpoenas is sometimes you get a subpoena that will list a wallet address that's a hot wallet where it's an omnibus wallet and multiple people use it. So on the subpoenas, you want to make sure you pinpoint the exact transaction date, the transaction amount, the
Hmm.
wallet address to and from, the transaction hash. And sometimes you have to look at that, your internal tools to figure out, okay, well, this one is actually associated with this specific user. It went through an omnibus wallet, but then it goes here under this user's account. So I know exactly which one this is associated with the subpoena. So internal tooling of the company providing the exchange service, crypto exchange service is super important. I've run across some that have had a great tooling in place that really helped me be able to dissect what this customer, who this customer was, the transaction, so then I could support the response to subpoena and the timeline needed.
Yeah, that it's interesting. I picked up on a couple things there, but one of the things I picked up on was we talked about sanctions and transactions, and you said we can block a transaction or we should block. Now that leads me to a question: is what happens if, because crypto continues, it's like full bore all the time, 24/7. What happens if you have a transaction that occurred 3 days ago, and today your transaction monitoring is saying, hey, you know that transaction we got 3 days ago? It's actually a sanctioned address now. What what at a high level, because I don't want to get into, company secrets or anything, but from a compliance perspective, a high level, what's kind of like the best course of action, and what do you do with that?
Yeah. So I think in that you have investigators looking at your alerts in your system that you use, and they will detect that situation. It could be a sanctions wallet address that was just sanctioned, but the transaction happened a week ago. So if the wallet, I look at the date that the wallet was sanctioned first to see
Hmm.
if it was sanctioned when the transaction happened or before. And then so if it was already sanctioned wallet address and it was a transaction that was received 3 days ago, then you look at are those funds still there? Do they move on to something else? You'd probably result in filing a SAR on it, but you would investigate the case, figure out what the actions need to be taken, and you would want to have investigators that kind of do that work and then escalate to the compliance officer for a decision of, does this require an OFAC filing, a SAR filing? What account action should we take on the account? Should we put the account on a watch list? What action should we take, that to help mitigate this from happening in the future? So that's kind of, investigators should spot it. They should analyze what's happened, feed it into the compliance officer or compliance team, and then they should make a decision on the appropriate action to take.
So it really goes back to when the wallet was sanctioned, right? I mean, that's really the
That,
concept there. Like, what's the timeline here?
yeah.
And
It's
is
like
it
with
just good?
Tornado Cash. When Tornado Cash was sanctioned, there was the all the activity before it wasn't an issue. It's all the activity after it that is the issue. And now I believe that it was unsanctioned, but some of the
It
wallets
was.
owner is still sanctioned. So that part kind of blows a compliance officer's mind apart because you're just like, oh man, now I got to go look back at this, and it's sanctioned during this time, this date. I think it was like July or August of some year, a few years back, to like this year sometime it was unsanctioned. So during that time, you have a sanctions obligation for reporting those
Mm,
transactions or taking appropriate action. But after that time, you may take a risk-based approach and say, well, if someone is using Tornado Cash, you would still want to maybe you decide you want to block that type of transaction activity for sending to Tornado Cash, or maybe you want to be informed that you saw this, and you put that person as a high risk customer because they did that transaction, and you're going to re-review their account in 3 months
mm.
or whatever your policy is. So it gets tricky when, just like it does in the fiat world with, sanctioned jurisdictions like Syria was unsanctioned from comprehensive sanctions recently. So, I would still take a risk-based approach of what is the risk of Syria, even though comprehensive sanctions were lifted, there's still a lot of SDNs and individuals that are sanctioned. So you have to kind of figure out what your appetite of your leadership is for risk, and then apply those proper controls that you feel that meet that risk tolerance.
Right. So it all comes down to what we talked about first, that risk assessment. What are you, the compliance officer, and your company willing to accept as risk, and how to mitigate it? So that's as for the whole audience out here, that's like step one, right? We're
Yeah.
going to build a good compliance program. Step one, risk assessment. Let's figure this out on what we're willing to do. Jeff, before we actually got on this call this morning, you and I were talking about AI. It's the next big thing, right? Or I should say, it's the big thing right now because it's already here. Um, tell us about AI and how that might influence what you're doing today and where it might go in the future, and how compliance. I guess there's two sides to this. How could it benefit and how could it not benefit from
Yeah, I
AI?
think first, AI is not a benefit in the fact that you have these auto-generated images of people, account information. You can do videos, you could do their voice. So trying to have identity verification controls for account authentication is going to be more difficult as AI flourishes. So I think that's the biggest like risk we have is making sure that we don't have account takeovers and issues like that caused through AI solutions. That's the thing that kind of worries me the most. The thing that I think the benefits of AI is I use it to help me write documents, write policy documents, write procedures. It may be used to do research on regulatory requirements. I've found it's very nice in summarizing like the MiCA document. Give me a summary of the MiCA document and things
Hmm.
like that. So instead of going through 100 pages of a regulatory requirement doc, you maybe do a summary and then maybe go to those sections that you're most interested in reading. Or so I think summarizing regulatory requirements to get like the TLDR out of it. The main reason or main, I think, reason I'm seeing compliance teams use it is to really reduce your false positive population. We should have tools that look at your alerts, whether they're sanctions alerts, and for sanctions, for any screening you do of customers against sanctions list, PEP list, adverse media list, enforcement action list, you've got to screen name and address. I see some solutions that screen only name. And how can you manage the false positives generated from just screening a name? You need to screen name and address, and then other attributes that you have. Sometimes the lists don't have date of birth and other things like that as attributes. So, but using an AI solution to auto false positive things that have the right rule sets that you feel you're have high confidence that's a false positive, but also auto escalate anything that's a true positive. You don't need an investigator to look at a true positive alert if it's clear that it is a true positive. Get those escalated to your compliance manager right away. So that doesn't have to be delayed through that process because you might have to mitigate a risk that's identified through that true
Hmm.
positive. And then humans are really working in between the layer in the gray area where it needs a judgment of a human to review the case, to pull additional data in and figure out what if this should be a match reviewed and escalated for a decision, or if you can make a false positive or true positive decision. And I think that amount of that gray area that requires humans to review is going to shrink over time. But the part that I think compliance departments need to do is they got to train those AI models. They have to test them. They have to validate them. So having that data engineer, having those investigators helping to review the alert results of an AI model and having procedures on how you do that written that are very detailed is super important. And then if a regulator comes and inspects how you're using AI, you could show them this is how we configure the system. This is our model testing procedure. These are our model testing results. This is where we've made some adjustments based off the results. And this is our continuous testing process we do of that AI model to make sure we're not missing anything. If you have a small amount of data, it's really difficult to use AI. Maybe now it's getting better, but I've always felt that whenever you do a machine learning model, you need to have large amounts of data is helpful. Um, and then I think what I my always what I always work towards is having one level of investigators. I've been at places where I started at where they had a mess of configure of their configurations and alerts, and they had four layers of investigators. One that reviewed data really quick, one that reviewed data for 5 minutes, made a decision, then one did like a 15, 30-minute review, and then it was escalated compliance for problem matches. I think if you get to a model where you just have one layer of investigators, but they need to be like your tier three, higher level investigators, that's kind of where I think the AI model should help us get to. And then over time, I think that the tier three investigators is, I don't see how AI models could replace them, but I think we'll see how AI develops over time. But we really should be able to get rid of the easy alerts and shrink the amount of gray area that requires human review.
So, as a follow-up, is AI good at detecting AI? So you have fake images and fake documents. I mean, I'm like everyone else in the world. I like to scroll once in a while, sit in my chair. Um, you look at some of these videos and you're like, is that real or is that fake? It's getting harder and harder to tell. So can AI detect AI? Is that something
Yeah.
we're looking at, or?
I think there's some attributes of it they can. I think they have optical character recognition solutions that are trying to find fake, IDs and other things. Your KYC process should always be a selfie with the ID. But even that is, I've seen it where the selfie and the picture is actually on the ID, so I knew it was fake, So there's some things that people do that trying to use AI that you can easily detect, but it's getting harder and harder to detect that. So I think that's a big issue for us to solve for.
Yeah, I remember I was opening an account. I forget exactly where, somewhere in the U.S. exchange, but they're like, take a picture, hold it next to your face with your driver's license, and it had to have a sign that said, I will only use this account for X amount of stuff. And I was thinking that was pretty, at the time, that was a pretty decent way to do KYC, but or ID verification. But now I'm thinking you could generate that if you wanted to.
Yeah, and
I don't know
using
how
like
real it would
biometrics
look.
data, facial recognition, voice. I think there's some payment apps where you use your palm. I think biometrics is a key step forward to prevent the AI fraud, but how you use that biometric data and making sure that doesn't get in the hands of the AI solutions that are generating fraud is your risk then. So I think exposing the right biometric solutions, maybe with 2 or 3 factor authentication solutions, is where we may need to go over time. I don't know. It's going to be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, so the more we go forward, the more we go back, because pretty soon you're going to have to walk into a physical place and say, "Yep, it's me. I'm right
Yeah.
here."
It's really me.
So
I'm really that person.
here I am. I'm not fake and I'm not AI. I'm sitting right here. Yeah. So, well, we got a couple more minutes, and so when you're reviewing new regulations against your existing products, what do you see a need for in technology? So you're looking at what you got, what the regulations coming. Do you see any technology that would just make life better for you coming down the pipe? AI, obviously, we just talked about it. I mean, who knows? Eventually, it might just do everything for you. We don't know. But is there some kind of technology that just makes your life better?
Yeah, I mean, right now outside of the US, it's very hard to do KYC. KYB is helpful in a lot of the tools we have out there, but we have some tools in the US where you can KYC somebody and know that it's at least get the attributes of the databases to verify it's them. Outside the US, it's very difficult. So when you go into some countries, they have ID systems that people fake and scam as well. So I think what's really difficult is just having a global verification solution that you could trust, that
Mm,
that really you can validate things against. I think the besides AI, it's also the adoption. We have a lot of blockchains now out
mhm.
there. I forget what the latest count is, probably 3, 4, 5,000, maybe
Yeah,
more.
probably more than that. There's a ton
Yeah,
of them.
I haven't looked recently, but how are these forensic blockchain companies onboarding these different blockchains? So, a law enforcement person or a customer or a compliance staff can look at the transactions associated with that blockchain, the swaps they do across different blockchains, and all the
Mm,
things they can do
hmm.
there. The technology around that is desperately needed to be built out so we can better trace where stolen funds have gone to, where do they hit the exchange, so we can give law enforcement that information to say it looks like these funds were stolen from this customer and it went through this process. This is the wallet address, transaction hash, dates, times, amounts. And this is the exchange it hit at this point in time. So then law enforcement can take that and go to that exchange and do a subpoena, where we can hopefully identify who the individual is, hoping that exchange has good, strong KYC controls and they're not fake IDs, and then find out where the funds went from there. So I think the ability to trace funds with the blockchain, everything's there.
Yeah.
That's what I love about blockchain, but it's just having the tools that kind of help you identify the attributes of wallet addresses associated with exchanges, so you can trace the funds to know exactly where they're at. And hopefully law enforcement could assist in being able to recover those funds if possible.
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were saying that wouldn't it be nice? eventually, and we'll get there. I mean, because that's what Merkle does. We build these tools, but we'll get there hopefully sooner rather than later. But I mean, it's a process. But wouldn't it be nice if you could peel chain, like there's 1,000 addresses in the peel chain, and you could just ask AI to like get me to the end, tell me what's the common wallet at the end, right? Because you know somewhere
Yeah.
down the line all this is going to come back together, and where's it going to go? I mean, because it could probably do it in a couple of seconds, whereas me as an investigator, I'm going click, click, click.
Yeah, and you're adding your
Uh,
math of where the funds are going, and you're like, so AI generate that for you? That would be amazing.
Yeah, or maybe sort this graph out because it's all like a spider web and like tell me
Yeah.
what's important here. Yeah, so one of these days maybe that'll come to fruition. And I think it will. I think it's just around the corner to be honest with you, but we'll see. Um, so Jeff, we have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to open the floor up for some questions and answers. Um, and so let me just pop open the question box and see what we got here. I got no questions there. So let me just tell the audience if you have a question, throw it in the box or the chat or something, and we'll take a look at it. And we'll we'll answer some questions. I saw a hand up a little earlier, so in the meantime, we're waiting for that. I'm going to ask you this. This question is kind of a little bit off topic, but not too much. When you're looking at hiring a compliance person, what is some of the training you look for with that person, or maybe their experiences? What suits that person well to come on board to a crypto compliance place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for like KYC verification, KYB verification, I think having someone that's worked in a service desk for a company where they're verifying identity of individuals is super perfect mapping into that function. So I try to find people that have like that service desk, help desk type support experience, and always have a great attention to detail, maybe some experience in identifying fake IDs or at least an interest in that, an interest in looking up social media to find other
Mm,
indicators to validate identity of somebody. So that's kind of like for the KYC, KYB verification type resources. For transaction monitoring, I think it's really someone that's more analytical. Maybe, I mean, someone that has like business analyst skills where they could pull their own data out of the database to show the mapping where we don't have the tools that do it for you automatically. The ability to think where you can look at, okay, is this person, you kind of have to think out of the box for AML. So you need to first know what are the red flags you're looking for and be able to understand that in the technology you're using, but then to be able to go through and decipher all this vast amount of data and figure out what is the exact thing that is the most concerning that's happened through these transactions that we need to highlight and be able to write up a good narrative that explains what happened. So I think writing skills is also important. People that can write a very clear narrative, be concise, and get right to the point of things, be able to see things that really don't matter as much as other things and highlight those things in your narrative are super important. So definitely looking for people that I think have more of some investigator background, and then that you could help. And if you need to train them in another area, like a traditional banking investigator that's been doing it for a while, can come into the crypto world, learn the crypto investigation techniques and tools, and probably have all the other base skills you need and can flourish in that role while also learning and developing into new skill sets. So those types of people definitely are good matches for developing people.
oh, excellent. I mean, so it really comes down to someone that has critical thinking skills, can sort out, large amounts of data and come to a reasonable conclusion.
Yeah. The other thing
Um,
is localization. If people have solutions that are in local languages like Arabic, Japanese, European languages, Spanish, you also may want to have people on your investigation team that speak those languages because in
mhm,
certain cases, I found that there's social media platforms that people will use in those different cultures, and having someone that's part of that culture in your investigation team, A, gives you a very diverse team, which gives you a huge amount of additional intelligence, but B,
mhm.
it gives you that intelligence of, well, yeah, this person that's in Dubai uses this, solution and this social media solution. I was able to find additional attributes about them there, an image of them, and something that I could use to help with in the investigation. So having resources that speak the different languages that you support are also super important.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be very, very valuable. Certainly with just kind of culture and how people talk and what it might mean. So, yeah, so I have quite a few questions here that popped up, which is thank you very much to the audience. Um, some I think we covered already, so but I do want to get to this one. How important is it to integrate digital telemetry signals such as device behavior, geolocation, and session anomalies into traditional transaction monitoring rules to enhance detection of fraud typology? So that came in from Henry. So thank you, Henry. Um, what do
Yeah,
you think?
I think that's really useful. I think I love the tools that give you additional attributes of the individual's account where you see they're always in the UK, they live in UK, they were verified there, but then you have someone that's in Iran with an IP address detected trying to do a transaction, and you're like, well, do they go to Iran? Are they Arabic? No, it looks like they're not. I mean, the location information is super important, and you can feed the location telemetry into your AML rules to say, alert if the person is X number of miles or kilometers away from their home location and this is happening. That way you can early detect potential account takeovers. For example, do they have a recent email change? Did they change their phone number? Did they change their authentication method? Did they change the UBID of the PC that they're accessing the account from? All those things are super important to have. And so having a tool that can pull all those additional data elements together are good. Always make sure that you include those in your privacy policy as well. I just want to stress
Mm,
your privacy policy should include how you collect data, how you use data. And so for all those types of PII you may collect on somebody, make sure it's also called out in your privacy policy. Like IP address, I believe in GDPR is a PII data in GDPR countries. I don't think they're in the US, but maybe I think in the state of California listed as PII data, your IP address. So you want to make sure you or follow your privacy policy as you're pulling that additional telemetry data. The second thing is I've used solutions that pulled like information on an account and all the fingerprints out there, and then mapped it to other accounts that we had
hmm.
and
Yep.
found relations as well. And that kind of helps you find fraud rings or people working together. I found one there was a person talking to someone else in a memo, and they said, "Hey, our boss said move it here." So I knew the two were working together, and that was part of, the information that was part of the investigation to kind of show that this account's related to this account, that's related with this account. And so I think the related accounts piece is you really need a tool to kind of help you manage that. So the telemetry data of everything you can capture of an individual as they're using the product or service you're doing is super important.
Yeah, that was very interesting what you said about the privacy policy. Make sure it includes all that information. Your device really is it's almost like you. It holds everything that you've done recently or in the past year, how long you've ever had the device. And I've seen there's different programs out there now that allow people to actually fingerprint the device and kind of risk score the device. Like how risky is the device? Forget the person. How risky is the device? Because everything that person does is usually through that porthole. So it's like a snapshot into what the person's doing. And I've also, I train a lot of local police departments and just police department generals. But I always tell them when you do a subpoena, try to ask for that information if you can get it. This device, is it connected somewhere else? Is there another account with the same fingerprint of this device being accessed? So, that's great information. Thank you for bringing that up. That is probably one of the top things in crypto is marrying those two things together: transactions with device fingerprints and identity, right? So it's like this triad of getting the best information you can get.
Yeah.
So let me see here. Let me grab another question here. Um, I think we've already answered what makes crypto compliance stand out against other compliance programs. I think we've already been down that road. Um, this is from Timon. It says, in practice, how do companies who showcase proven AML CFT loopholes, despite their best efforts to adhere to compliance guidelines, get fined? Is there such thing as a regulatory slap on the wrist? So, if you got loopholes, um, yeah, how do you, I guess he's asking about enforcement, what's enforcement there? If you want me to read that again, I
Yeah.
will.
No, that's fine. I think the one thing that comes to mind there is I like to read the penalties that companies have have been fined with both OFAC and FinCEN penalties in the crypto space. And to understand, because they give you all the information about it. Same thing as like a data breach. When a data breach happens, a company publishes how it happened and what they did to mitigate it. But I like to learn from those penalties to figure out, okay, well, these are the controls they had that failed. And this is the reason why and what they're doing to fix it, which is great. What can I learn from that to make sure I don't have those same penalties? For loopholes, I think, when you identify something that is an issue and a compliance control has failed, you need to look at the regulatory requirements associated with that thing that you found. You need to seek your inside outside counsel to help you analyze the regulatory requirements and to make sure that you are following the letter of the law and that there are loopholes, and I don't know if loophole is the right word, but there are exceptions. Like, for example, I believe like in Cuba, people that are doing teaching or telecommunications are allowed. I think Iran, you could share, I think it's a books and learning material is allowed. So there are sanctions exceptions out there, and so you may offer a product or service that falls under that exception. So your best friend, I always say, is your legal counsel, both inside and
Mm,
outside, to help guide you through how should you mitigate this risk if it's a control failure, or how do you need to approach a new regulation that's coming down that impacts you with the right balance of controls that allow you to meet the law, but it doesn't like cause you to have to go overboard in what you are having to do, causing a reduced customer experience. So outside counsel is your best friend, inside and outside counsel.
yeah, that's right. I had a friend of mine. He was leaving HSI, and he was going to a pretty big crypto company, and he called me and said, "Well, if looking back at where you've been and where you are now, what's the best piece of advice you can give me?" I said, "Find your general counsel and take him to lunch,
Yeah.
and be friends, because that's probably the best thing that's going to help you is your general counsel, especially in this business, right? There's so many questions and stuff. Outside counsel too is very valuable as well, but certainly start with your general counsel.
Cool.
Um, yeah, so I think we're right at time pretty much. Let me see if we got another question here. Um, and then, uh, yeah, I think that's it for the big questions. It was very nice to have you on, Jeff. This was a super valuable webinar too, because I learned a ton of stuff from you just sitting here listening. I'm sure the audience did. We have a lot of attendees, so I appreciate it. Is
Yeah,
there
thanks
anything
for
else?
having me.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think the key messages is, the regulation informs the policy, policy informs the procedures, procedures inform what investigators you need to do the job, and just always, I think, work to figure out early, getting your data engineer, on board that you'll need for your transaction monitoring. That's super important to have a good, strong resource there that can be dedicated to you to help you put this together. And make sure your tools are tuned and documented so you don't over alert on things that you don't even need to look at, because you really want to focus your people on the highest risk identified, prioritize those alerts so you can then get the right things filed to support the SAR filing or OFAC filing timeline. So that's really important. And then building the metrics around that, you need to have your metrics to start with your SLAs, which may be a regulator reporting cycle time, down to your metrics of performance for productivity and quality. And quality of investigations is super important to have someone that's doing QA, giving feedback to investigators, improving the procedures. So that's super important to have that cycle going as you're building out your investigation team.
Right. So really being, chief compliance officer or something is about building good teams, good policies, and good workflow,
Right.
and making sure you stick with that, and training, right? On top of that, training and regular training. So yeah, I mean, this has been a great session. I think I'm gonna go back and watch it again, and I'm gonna take some notes because it really is good stuff. I
Yeah.
appreciate it, Jeff. I'm sure the audience appreciates it too. So um, thank you very much for attending Merkle Science Meets. Hopefully, if you didn't get a chance and well, let me put it this way: if someone's on this call and knows someone that wanted to see it and didn't get a chance, tell them they got to see it. Certainly, if they're in crypto compliance, Jeff is obviously very knowledgeable and skilled in this area. So, Jeff, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, evening, morning, whatever you're at in the world, and we'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.